Comedy is no joke. With its far-reaching and diverse viewership, comedy has a significant influence on our social atmosphere. Today, political comedies attract larger audiences than the regular news. Much of modern comedy draws its roots from the 1950s, where one show of a not-so-typical American TV family challenged the rhetoric of domesticity in the 1950s and opened doors for future legions of minority comedians. By utilizing comedy, I Love Lucy, a favorite American sitcom in the 1950s, provided groundbreaking representation for women and Latinx during an era focused on traditional values. By breaking barriers in the field of comedy, I Love Lucy gave minorities a voice to comment on social and political problems, utilizing the platform as a vehicle for change. Following the upheaval of World War II, American society focused on domestic containment, strictly defining gender roles with husbands as breadwinners and wives as homemakers. Employers turned away women, believing their true roles were as wives, preparing dinner for their hard-working husbands, and as mothers, instilling American values in their children. It was the early 1950s, and the television was making its way into American households, creating a visual and easy way to engage with the public. The popularity of television led to many radio shows being adapted to this new medium. A young star named Lucille Ball was already popular on radio for her signature slapstick humor and funny voice. This was drastically different from the typical actresses of the time, who studio heads insisted could only be seen as beautiful and glamorous. Despite the Hollywood norms she defied, the widespread popularity of Lucille Ball led to CBS creating a sitcom to showcase her comedic skill. I Love Lucy. Lucille demanded that Desi Arnaz, her Cuban husband in real life, be cast as her husband in the show.
CBS thought nobody would believe that a redheaded American would marry a Cuban, and she had to prove to CBS and everything that, yeah, it could work.
Lucille used her leverage as an irreplaceable and unique comedic actress to ensure Desi Arnaz was cast as her husband and break past the barrier of American identity. Thus marks the first interracial couple on television. I Love Lucy aired from 1951 to 1957. Within its time period, it was widely acclaimed by its vast audience, totaling in the millions. By 1952, it had been reported as the #1 favorite of the American public, and remained in that place for 4 of its 6 seasons. It seemed the entirety of the American public loved Lucy.
You're creating a sense of belonging. When you get a joke, you belong to you're part of something bigger than you are.
Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz co-owned the production company behind I Love Lucy, Desilu, giving them new control over the narrative they told, and greater power to break barriers from behind the scenes. This prevented the perpetuation of negative stereotypes, because both Lucille and Desi had final say on what was broadcasted on air. Although Desi and Lucy strived to showcase unprecedented characters, they were still limited by societal expectations. By starring the first interethnic couple, and one of the first female comedic leads, I Love Lucy was already outside of the typical TV family. So in order to attract a large audience and be commercially successful, the directors made sure the plot reflected the traditional domestic values for the 1950s, with Lucy Ricardo as a housewife, and Ricky Ricardo keeping her in check as a level-headed patriarch of the house. Lucy Ricardo always struggled to be more than a housewife, and in episode after episode, she rebelled against the constraints of her role, taking a job, scheming to make money, disguising herself to perform at the club, and generally messing with Ricky. The producers ensured that every act of rebellion attempted by Lucy ended in an outlandish disaster and attempts to appeal to conventional norms. Still, Lucy challenged the myth of domestic bliss and directly exposed the absurdity of barriers placed on women in the 1950s. I Love Lucy spoke to the millions of unrequited housewives watching at home who, like Lucy, wanted something more, to break past the barrier of domestic containment. While the 1950s were family-oriented, conversation about reproductive health was taboo. However, in 1953, at the start of I Love Lucy's second season, it was apparent that Lucille Ball was pregnant. Rather than stopping the production of I Love Lucy during Lucille's maternity, Desi and Lucille fought for the continuation of the show and reworked her pregnancy into the storyline, turning it into the first pregnancy on television.
We're having a baby.
many barriers in appealing to traditional norms while introducing a new perception of pregnancy. I Love Lucy broke past them all by uniting their audience through comedy. On January 19, 1953, the arrival of Little Ricky Ricardo attracted an estimated 44 million viewers to CBS for I Love Lucy, a peak for the already massively popular show. By continuing to produce and act throughout her pregnancy, Lucille ultimately showed the capability of women in the career sector to maintain a family and continue working. Thus, while Lucy Ricardo functions as an image for motherhood in the 1950s, Lucille Ball functions as an anthem for working women. Decades later, comedians are able to work their pregnancies into their comedy routines because of the precedents set by Lucille Ball. Today, many comedians see pregnancy not as a barrier, but a further way to connect with their audience and make people laugh. Up until the 1950s, anti-miscegenation laws prohibited interracial marriage. By portraying Desi Arnaz as a husband and a father, I Love Lucy redefined what it meant to be American. In an era focused on domestic ideals, fatherhood was a position of respect. Therefore, Ricky's role as a devoted father and loving husband uplifted Latino portrayal in the American landscape. Life was still not easy for Latinos off the screen. Many public places were still segregated, and the Chicano civil rights movement was just getting started. Initially, the executives wanted to anglicize the character Ricky as much as possible. Using his power as a producer, Desi ensured that Ricky Ricardo maintained his role as an American father and husband, all while championing his Cuban roots.
You never said no to Desi Arnaz. He got things done.
While being the poster child for the 1950s, Lucy and Ricky's son, Little Ricky, continued to embrace his mixed heritage. The Ricardo family's weekly appearance in American households began to normalize the presence of Hispanics within America.
When comedy about traditionally marginalized groups is experienced by people who have the least exposure to those groups in their real lives, they're actually the most impacted by that comedy.
I Love Lucy broke barriers for minorities to enter comedy. By giving a voice to women and Latinx of the 1950s, I Love Lucy opened doors for female-centric comedies and increased representation for Latinx in mainstream media. I Love Lucy had to work within the framework of 1950s tradition, but by doing so, they established a foundation for future minority comedians to build their own stories outside of typical conventions and enact change through comedy.
So comedy works in a couple of different ways as a cultural force for social change. So comedy opens the doors to things that may be hard to talk about, even issues that are taboo that might not be appropriate for us to talk about. Comedy can actually help humanize people and groups who are often othered in our media system, dehumanized, not heard from very much in our media system. Perhaps most importantly, comedy can offer a kind of civic imagination.
I Love Lucy created a foundation for comedy to be used by minorities to create social change and break further barriers. One such example is when activist and sexual assault survivor Amanda Wen partnered with comedy site Funny or Die to highlight the absurdities of current sexual assault legislation. This led to massive push for the entabling of the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act of 2016 and its unanimous passing. By highlighting social issues in an accessible and relatable form, comedy continues to break barriers. In an era where information is spread through comedy, it's important that minorities have a platform to tell their own stories in order to prevent the perpetuation of stereotypes and offer a variety of perspectives.
It's easy to make fun of someone when they can't respond.
Power that comedy can give to really any individual to kind of rewrite their own story.
While there is still progress to be made, minorities in comedy continue to reinvent the status quo. Each barrier broken through comedy is possible because of I Love Lucy and the glass ceiling it dared to crack. Because with just one laugh, we can reimagine American ideals. With one episode, we can open doors for minorities. And with one show, we can break down barriers.